Tonight we have a wonderful turnout. I think you all deserve a round of applause for this. It's an incredibly important topic that we're going to be talking about. The topic, as you see again, on the link between housing and preterm birth. And what's very special about this particular collaboratory, it's an opportunity to feature our important partnership with the Health Equity Institute. And really excited to introduce our leader for this activity. This is Jessica Wolin. She is the Associate Director for Community Practice at the Health Equity Institute at San Francisco State University, and the co-investigator for the Preterm Birth Initiative, and the principal investigator for the Benioff Community Innovation Project. So Jessica, without further ado, thank you.
How you all doing? That was really late. How are you all doing? Thank you. It's only Monday, right? It's Monday. We're going to act like it's Friday. Welcome. Please come grab a seat. We do have some extra chairs, which some people are going to be able to, I think, bring out. We may need to have some chairs out there by the food. So I want to welcome you also to the collaboratory as you all are coming and sitting down, and say thank you for coming today. And I know this isn't the usual way it's set up in here, which is like an auditorium, and we did this on purpose to try to really have a conversation and to create a sense of community in here. So thank you for getting a little bit loose with us. I hope we're going to have an enthusiastic participation today. So I want to, I need the clicker. I have too many things going on. Okay. So I want to go through the agenda of what we're going to be doing today. And then I'm going to turn it over to various folks. So everyone that you see sitting up here is going to be playing a role in presenting today. So what we're going to do today is talk about the relationship between inadequate housing and preterm birth. And this is really, in some ways, a beginning for us in this project. We are not here to deliver today results of a research project. We are here to talk about the project that we're engaged in, some of the preliminary work that we've done, and to build on the work that other folks have done. And so that's what you're going to hear today. And we look forward to continued relationship with all of you if you're interested in participating in this work with us. And I think you'll hear a little bit today about how that's possible. So today, after a little bit of an introduction, you're going to hear from some of our community partners about their experience around this issue. And then you're going to hear about the research that we're going to be involved in, and you're going to hear from the community innovators who are here and some of our graduate students who are doing some of their own research around this topic. And then we're going to have some dialogue and then close it out and enjoy some more good food. So let's see, before we jump into anything else, I want to have us get a sense of who's in the room. So you can just raise your hand when I call out if you're from a certain group. So those of you who are here and you work for a city or a county, anywhere, San Francisco or in the East Bay, Fresno, anyone, hand high. Thank you for being here. If you're associated with an academic institution, you're a student, you're a professor, you're a researcher, you're a clinician, anyone, if you're from an academic institution, excellent. If you work with a community-based organization, anywhere in the Bay Area or beyond, excellent, thank you. If you are one of the community innovators for the Benioff Community Innovation Project, can you stand up, please? You can have a seat, thank you. If you're a graduate student in the Master's of Public Health program at San Francisco State, can you stand up, please? If you work with Preterm Birth Initiative, either California or East Africa, can you stand up for a second? finally, if you work at the Health Equity Institute at San Francisco State and worked really, really hard to pull off this event, can you stand up, please? And now I'd like to turn it over to Jenée Johnson from Black Infant Health, who's going to lead us in getting grounded in our work together today.
Good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. It's a pleasure to be in community with you, talking about something that is so important. Because what is basic to life, what is basic for every human being on the planet, is food, shelter, and clothing. And so, what is a challenge for us in this world-class city of ours and in the surrounding Bay Area cities and counties is housing, which is why we're here. So my task was to initially lead you through a meditation. That's important because it gets us in touch with our breath, activates the parasympathetic nervous system, which is the calming system, and allows us to just be still and hear. Let those thoughts go by like clouds and just be present. But as I was checking y'all out, I said, something else needs to happen before that. Because we're here in community, and I want to generate community with you. So what I want you to do, this is a call and response that I learned at Camp Oneida in New York State. So I want you to do this with me, okay? It's going to generate some energy and help us to know as we hear each other's voices that we're not up to this alone. Got it? Got it. And don't be shy and do not be lame. Tango! Tango! Unde mare mare o! Unde mare mare o! Tango! Tango! Upi pikumbae! Upi pikumbae! Maripa maruwe! Maripa maruwe! Tango! Tango! If you would place your feet on the floor, you're holding food, you stick it under a chair. Make sure your back is comfortable. Feel how your shoulders all sit in a comfortable position. And I invite you to close your eyes or drop your gaze. Take in one deep cleansing breath. Let it out through your mouth. And then begin to breathe, paying attention to the movement of your breath, gently, easily, slowly. Let your breath ground you and anchor you. There's nothing else to do, nowhere else to be, but still. Be still and let the thoughts roll by like clouds. Let go of your commute here, let go of your day. Let go of anything that you might be feeling anxious about. Just breathe into it. Being still and staying with your breath. Be still. Stay with your breath. And gently and easily on the count of 3, I'd like you to return to the space. On the 1, on the 2, and on the 3. This is what it's going to take for us to work together. It will take us using our voices, loud and clear, in unison, and it will take us staying in connection with our breath, that very essence of our life force, to help us clear and be calm and activate compassion and activate presence and courage. So I am so happy that I get to do this work with all of you. And we're ready to proceed. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Jenée. I want to ask Chanel to come up, and as Chanel's coming up, I want to take this opportunity to let everyone know, and you're going to learn more about the community innovators and their amazing work, but to let, I don't even know if they know, but one of our innovators had a baby this morning. Healthy baby boy this morning, upstairs, so right around here. So we're super blessed for that, and I'm now going to hand it over to Chanel Williams from PTBi.
Awesome. Good evening. Good evening. So excited to hear about our innovator getting a healthy baby boy today, 38 weeks, which we're really excited about. So we want to just provide a little bit of context of how the Benioff Community Innovators fits within the work that we're doing for the Preterm Birth Initiative. We have 4 pillars that really lift up our work. First is a life course approach. We're looking at preconception all the way to postnatal. We have place-based context. We know that San Francisco is different than Fresno, it's different than Oakland, and we really respect that, and that's a huge part of this work, is a place-based approach. We're working in collaboration, cross-sector collaboration, which is really the work that Jonathan is leading for us, our collective impact work that is in San Francisco and also in Fresno. They're doing amazing work in Fresno, and we're hoping to get that kicked off in San Francisco as well with all of your support in this room. And finally, our community partnership piece, which I feel a part of doing research differently and the right way is involving the communities that are most impacted. I think that that should always be at the forefront of all the work that we do. And so as part of the Benioff Community Innovators, we also have the Community Advisory Board, which represents 16 women who are in San Francisco, Oakland, and Fresno. We have doulas, lactation consultants, nurse midwives, women with lived experience in preterm birth, advising us on our funding decisions, as well advising us on what is culturally acceptable, what's relevant, and what's gonna make sense for their communities. And these women are powerful. They've already done 2 cycles of funding reviews, and their work is amazing. They all come to this with a passion for change, and we love them. We also have the research prioritization piece, which Linda, she's a leader in that piece with Monica, who's not here tonight. We went to women in all 3 geographies to ask the question, what would you do if you had $50 million? What would you prioritize in terms of research? And we got about 279 unique researchable questions from these women. And so that's a huge part of what we do. And last but not least, where the Benioff Community Innovators sit is in our community research commons. We want to invest in our communities to do this work, and a big part of that is funding, it's capacity building, and it's really working together with our community-based partners who you'll hear from tonight. So thank you so much.
There's some empty seats up here for folks who are standing in the back. There's other seats around if people want to come take a second and Come sit down, you don't need to stand in the back, unless you want to be near the food. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the Benioff Community Innovation Project before I turn it over to my partners. So the Benioff Community Innovation Project is a partnership of a group of organizations. I think it's the next slide. Here we go. The San Francisco State Health Equity Institute is where some of us work. Some of us are from the Preterm Birth Initiative at UCSF. And then we have 4 community-based organizations who are all here today. The Women's Community Clinic, the Urban Services YMCA, the Homeless Prenatal Program, and San Francisco Black Infant Health. And then, the Department of Public Health are all partners in this community academic partnership. At the core of this are 10 women who are being hosted by the 4 community agencies. They were identified by the 4 community agencies to participate in this project. They're each committing 6 hours a week, paid, for 6 months to a year to work on this project. And they're gonna speak for themselves about the work they're doing. In addition, we have 13 graduate students in the Masters of Public Health program at San Francisco State who are partnering with the community innovators to do the work that we're doing together, which I'll tell you a little bit more about. So the project has 3 main objectives. The first objective is to create this partnership, which we've done, and we got off the ground at the end of the 2016 into the early part of this winter. And then the second piece of our work together is supporting residents and community-led research, program development, policy, agenda setting. And so that's a big part of what we're doing, in addition to trying to support their own personal and professional development. And then finally, our work together is to create an action agenda around where research needs to go, where programs need to go, where policy needs to go, to improve the living conditions for pregnant women in San Francisco. Our work is based in San Francisco, although it's clearly relevant to lots of places around the Bay Area. So this is the span of our work over this year. We convened in November. The innovators and the students started working at the end of January. We're now beginning of May. We're about to begin our own data collection and evidence building on the work that's already been done, and I'll say a little bit more about that in a little bit. And then we're going to be looking to start forming an agenda for action towards the middle of the summer, July. And then in the fall, working towards pushing for that action agenda, and that's where many of you come in. And there's a collective impact process that I think some folks in the Department of Public Health will mention that we are going to be tied into, that will bring together city government agencies that will be our partners in trying to move forward on change. So our work is it's hard. I don't want to lie, it's hard. It's also extremely intentional and in lots of ways miraculous. And I feel blessed to be deep in this with all of these beautiful women. It's all women up here. Super powerful. But we're grounded in a number of different approaches and principles in our work. And a lot of it is actually around the room, around you, in front of you, and in your packets. And we wanted to share this with you so you'd understand what's guiding us in our work together. So first of all, we are using community-based participatory research principles to guide our work, and that may be familiar to many of you, what that means. In addition, recently was an article written by, for many of you, a colleague, Meredith Minkler, and others, who have developed what's up on the wall behind you here, and I encourage you to find the article about what it means to collaborate for equity and justice, and the principles that they've come up with. And so we're trying to embrace what's new around how you do campus and community partnering. And then we're using an approach that came out of liberation education, which is praxis, which is the idea of reflecting on your own experience, listening to others, and then moving to action. And for those of you who do community organizing and community engaged work, sometimes this is referred to as from me to we. And so that is another grounding set of principles for us in our work. In addition, if you aren't familiar to it, I want to introduce you to the idea of research justice. And research justice it's written about in a lot of places. There was a local organization that doesn't exist anymore called the Data Center that really put forward this idea in a very profound way. The handout, it's in your folder, it's on the floor, is from them. And it's about the need to raise up community knowledge in the research enterprise. And that is something we are holding very close in our own work. And then finally, we developed our own guiding principles for this project. They're on the wall behind you, but they're also up here, which is about doing no harm, which seems so obvious, but so often we do harm in our research and our partnerships. So doing no harm, incorporating reflective and creative processes in our work. I want to acknowledge Brett Cook, who's back here, who is a socially engaged artist who is working with us. Who's working with us in this project and is a blessing for all of us. To practice acceptance and cultural humility in our work together, and to invest in community self-determination. And these are our guiding principles for this project. So finally, I just want to end here by saying why focus on housing and preterm birth. Some of you may have seen this slide. It's not mine. It comes from the Department of Public Health. I saw Jody somewhere who put this together. Thank you, Jody, from DPH, which illustrates the situation in San Francisco as best as we can know it about who are likely to have a preterm birth and the disparity that we see between folks who live in either public housing or shelters or in SROs or daily hotels and other folks. And so this was, when a bunch of us looked at this slide, we were talking about, at one point we were talking about just focusing on public housing, and it was like, well, that doesn't make any sense. So this slide was a big impetus for thinking about the need to look at housing and the crisis around housing in San Francisco and its relationship to adverse birth outcomes. In addition, this other slide comes from DPH as well, which illustrates the disparity based on ethnicity and race in San Francisco and others. And so this was another piece of this, because what we know is we have a dwindling African American population in San Francisco, and the majority of African Americans in San Francisco live in public housing. And so when you take this slide and the previous slide together, it's inescapable to need to look at the issue of where people live. What are their living conditions? In our project, we are summing all of this up and calling it inadequate housing. Housing can be inadequate in lots of ways. It can be fragile, it can be unstable, it can be unhealthy, it can be too expensive, it can be all these things that make it inadequate. And we're summing up a lot with that phrase, but that's what we're going to be using to describe housing in a lot of ways. And so, with that, I'm running out of time. On that, I'm going to turn it over to our community partners who are going to give you some of their perspectives on the intersection of housing and preterm birth. And so the first person I want to turn over to is Martha Ryan from the Homeless Prenatal Program.
Okay. Thank you, and good evening. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm going to add one other word, because it's not a type of housing, and it's called Unsheltered. The Homeless Prenatal Program sadly works with women who are pregnant and who are living in tents, who are living in cars, who are living on the street. Now, while I don't have the data to tell you that they will deliver or are at higher risk for delivering a preterm birth, I guarantee you that the stress of a mom who is pregnant, living in any one of these situations, has a much higher risk of delivering a preterm birth than somebody who's living in the housing projects or another unstable type of housing. I thought what I would do for you tonight is to tell you a little bit about how the new shelter entry system, the coordinated entry system, is coming about. We have a new Department of Homelessness, and now we're creating a new, they are creating a new system of entering into to the shelter system. In order to get into the shelter system, you have to fit the definition of a homeless family, which is changing, and you also have to be a resident of San Francisco. And being a resident of San Francisco means you have to have slept at least one night in the last 7 nights here in San Francisco. You have to have a child in the San Francisco Unified School District or preschool. And, but to be a homeless family, you have to be unsheltered. On this list, there's a list of 5. The 4th is pregnant. So that tells you what we're looking at here. So the first one is an unsheltered, meaning you live in the street, you live in a tent, you live in a car. Or, believe it or not, there are shelters here in the city where there are no beds. And people of all ages, pregnant moms included, will sleep on a mat on the floor. That is unacceptable. So they are number 2. And then families who report that they're in an unsafe situation, they would be number 3, and pregnant moms make it to number 4. And right now, a mother, an expectant mom, has to be in her last month of pregnancy, after all the brain has been developed, after all the organs have been developed, wait to the 3rd trimester, the last month of her pregnancy, to be able to be eligible to get into a shelter. Now, she might be eligible to get into a shelter, but then there might not be a room in the shelter, so she has to wait. She still won't be able to get in. A woman who is pregnant and has a medical condition would also percolate to the top of the list before a woman in her last month of pregnancy. There are concerns, of course, that we have about this. We have a concern about the definition of homelessness, and we also have a concern about the definition of residency in San Francisco. There are currently, only the homeless program, there are many other agencies that work with homeless women, but we have 28 pregnant moms waiting to get into the shelter list right now. These moms range anywhere from 11 weeks gestation to term. In order to be able to help these moms, what we've done in the past is we've gotten support from the Department of Public Health to house them in hotel rooms. It's called PATH, Pregnancy Assistance for Temporary Housing. And initially we had 5 rooms. It was in the Tenderloin. It was not safe, and so we ended that contract, and we moved to a much nicer hotel. Each room had a bathroom. Imagine that. A pregnant mom having a bathroom. And these rooms are also eligible for women who have a newborn. So this bathroom, so right now we almost had to have a riot to get more. We initially had 3, then we went to 5, and now we have 10. All 10 beds are filled. 2 of them are for women who suffer from medical issues. One is an HIV positive woman, and the other woman suffers from epilepsy. These are all clients that are at high risk for delivering a preterm birth. Now imagine the cost, not only to us, the taxpayer, but more importantly, to the mom and to the child that is born with a deficit. I'm just going to give you a couple of stories before my time runs out. And one is there's a 20-year-old woman, first time she's pregnant. She is now 35 weeks, due on the 12th of June. She's getting her prenatal care at San Francisco General. She has been on the waiting list to get into the shelter for quite some time now. They left Las Vegas, moved to San Francisco because of an eviction. She is currently living at the San Francisco airport. Now, I call that resourceful. She would be considered sheltered because there's a roof over her head. A 30-year-old pregnant mom, she's 36 weeks, due on the 5th of June. She is her second pregnancy. She is a 5-year-old. They're living in their car. Imagine, it moved out of the house because of domestic violence. Imagine, first of all, the mom and the stress that she has and is transmitting to her unborn child, but what about the 5-year-old who's trying to go to school, kindergarten? This is unacceptable. And then a 20-year-old pregnant mom sleeping on and off in a tent or at the BART station. She's 36 weeks, due on the 6th of June. She and her partner are originally from Merced, and so they don't know many of the resources here. She transferred, she's got all her benefits here, she's getting her care at San Francisco General. She's in recovery from amphetamine and marijuana use, and they've been waiting for several months to get into the shelter wait list. I want to end with a 32-year-old woman I met just recently. I was talking to one of the supervisors about the need to be able to have more housing and to be more flexible about pregnant moms that are homeless. And this is a 32-year-old woman who was homeless during her pregnancy. Her second pregnancy, she lost her first child to Child Protective Services. She was using drugs. She, sketchy prenatal care, San Francisco General, but in and out. It's hard to remain sober when you're on the street. It's really difficult. So she was using, and she delivered a baby. The baby was 33 weeks, preterm, spent a couple months in the hospital, and she said, when I was speaking to Supervisor Ronan, she said, I know that's why I delivered a preterm baby, because she was on the street and she was so stressed. She graduated, since then has graduated from a treatment program. She's housed. She happens to be housed in a single room occupancy hotel. I said, is that good? She says, it's mine. It's mine, and it has a kitchenette. It's all I need. Now her child is older. This was 2 years ago. But not only did she keep custody of this child, she's now in reunification for the last. I think that there's been a huge investment in housing for families with older children. I would really like us to create policy to go upstream and to really invest in moms that are pregnant now. That includes family planning, intentional pregnancies, but invest in family and moms that are pregnant and help them. Give them the resources and the opportunities that they need so that their children are not born into poverty and end up in tents or in other worse situations. Thank you.
There's not much I can add because Martha painted a very disturbing picture of what's going on in the housing crisis here in San Francisco. But I asked my staff to also tell me stories about women so that you understand that this is real. Numbers are fabulous because they help us document trends, but I want you to also hear about people's lives and the full context of their lives. Women come to the San Francisco Black Infant Health Program when they are pregnant. So no client that I will tell you about comes to our program just with a baby in arms. Everyone comes in pregnant. Our role is to shepherd women through their pregnancy and help them address chronic stress, social isolation, and empowerment. We have group sessions for prenatal, group sessions for postpartum, and then they work individually with family health advocates. Names have been changed, so Susan was a mother who had 5 kids and was living in public housing. While living there, she had issues with mold, mice, and violence. As her family health advocate, I helped her compose a letter to Housing Authority to take action on the mold and mice. She had elementary-aged children living in the house, and she was pregnant. Her daughter at the time was having tremendous health issues due to the mold that was accumulating in the house. Housing Authority finally came to take care of that situation. It was the violence that finally led Ashley to basically abandon her home and move in with her mother. Since housing is extremely difficult to find in San Francisco, she had to move in with her mother and her 5 children to feel safe. There were several instances where her windows were shot at and people had broken into her house and stole her food and whatever they could. So under those conditions, she could not did not feel safe to stay. Would you?
No.
That's the question, right? Living at her mother's was not an ideal solution, but the only one that made sense financially. As with many of the clients at Black Infant Health, the best she could do was fill out as many applications as possible for housing. So people act on the choices that they have, and often the choices are not that great. SH, 30-year-old pregnant mother of 8 children, has worked with Black Infant Health since the birth of her first child. Her housing journey has been a challenge to find and keep. She was provided temporary housing in Richmond in a hotel to live for 1 year, paid for by who? Who paid for that? Say it, you know it. Who paid for that? What city paid for her to live there? San Francisco. San Francisco pays for people to live outside of San Francisco. Do you get that? Now you do. She would be a San Francisco resident with hopes that she could find permanent housing by the end of the 1-year term. She was provided housing in the Tenderloin in a hotel. There is no kitchen in the hotels to prepare healthy meals, and she has diabetes. Her brother was murdered on the corner of the hotel where she was living. After 5 years of temporary housing, she moved to permanent housing 2 weeks ago in Richmond, California. As a program that works to decrease stress, social isolation, and build empowerment into our participants, the housing crisis is a stumbling block that we need to address. I won't tell you all that she said. Political elite, yes I will. Policymakers and planning officials need to take this very seriously. The housing crisis in San Francisco has affected all of my clients in one way or another. The most memorable client that I can recall, we'll call her Amber, a 30-year-old African-American woman who migrated to the West Coast. I have witnessed this participant struggle to obtain adequate housing since being unceremoniously evicted in a no-fault eviction, a process all too common to San Francisco renters who happen to live in a hot new neighborhood. I have witnessed Amber fight for basic accommodations while pregnant, existing on the kindness of friends and bouncing shelter to shelter. In Black Infant Health, she found a support group and resources to ease the burden of being homeless and pregnant. Amber, with the assistance of one of San Francisco's housing programs, has been placed in secure housing. While this is a blessing, it is also a curse. Because of San Francisco's housing shortage for low-income families, she has been placed in housing that takes a minimum 2 hours by car to get from San Francisco. She now resides in Sacramento. This housing in Sacramento has compromised her well-being in that she has no support system. She has no friends there. All the community that she has built is in San Francisco. And now she is in Sacramento alone with an infant. Sharita, a 29-year-old female, she's clearly a female, mother of 3. When she enrolled in Black Infant Health, she was staying in a shelter, and her time was almost up. She was only allowed to stay in the shelter for a total of 6 months. She's currently unemployed, and she's on CalWorks. She expressed the desire to go back to school, but cannot focus on school until her housing needs are met. She was able to connect with Compass Connecting Point as a resource to assist her in her housing search. She's desired to stay in the city San Francisco, where her 2 eldest children were enrolled in school. She had previously expressed her daughters falling behind in school due to their current housing situation and the stress it placed on them. She had no choice but to leave the city and obtain permanent housing in Sacramento once she timed out of the family shelter. Now, I remember this woman coming to a Photo Voice event, and her daughters were so impeccably dressed in their little school uniforms. The little plaid ones with the suspenders. And their hair was impeccably braided with sweet little barrettes in each braid, and their hair made noise every time they shook it. And I saw her come to support her sisters in the Photo Voice exhibition that we're having at the very elegant San Francisco Jazz Center. And I saw her come in with a bag. And one of the San Francisco Jazz Center employees just took her bag from her and said, "I'll put it away for you." And she came up with her children, and she took part and enjoyed the exhibit with everyone else. And then, this was in the fall, so by 7, 8 o'clock when the exhibit was over, it was dark outside. And I saw her go downstairs and get the suitcase and roll it out into the street with these 2 little girls. And I said, "Oh, that's so nice that she came in." And meanwhile, her belly was like this. And I said, "Oh," turned to one of my staff, "Oh, so nice that she came." And they said to me, I said, "Where does she live? Where is she going?" And they said, "Oh, she has to go get online for the shelter." And my breath stopped as I watched her drag her suitcase down Franklin into the dark of night with 2 school-aged children, belly full with a new life, to go find a place to sleep that night. That is unacceptable. That is unacceptable. How do we call ourselves humane? How do we call ourselves world class? How do we sit in these nice rooms and comfy chairs and eat delicious food? How do we do that day after day after day and not look to see that the most basic food, shelter, clothing is provided? What are we doing? I have to ask myself that as I watched her. What do I do? Do I go grab her, get in my car? What do I do? It starts way beyond me and my mid-level management job halfway in the Department of Public Health. It is about policy. It is about what we do at the voting booth. It's about how we communicate with our policymakers and with the people who make decisions on our behalf. How do we sleep at night going past these tent cities? How do we do that? I see tent cities where I didn't even know there was a space. So what I'm asking us to do is take a stand. No more faking and jaking. Because if I have to come to one more meeting, come on. Stop sending them out to the street to go protest. All of us with our professional badges should be standing somewhere on the lawn, on the steps of, and saying, as doctors, program managers, lawyers, Indian chiefs, whatever we do, this is unacceptable. Where are the voices of the professionals? How many more projects do we need to tell us that this is unacceptable? I'm just asking a question.
today. My name is Roble. I'm the Director of Community Programs and Workforce at the Women's Community Clinic. And I'm just going to take a few moments to share a little bit of reflection and to try to build on what Martha and Jenée shared so that I'm not duplicating all of the amazing information that they've just shared with us. First, I want to call in one of our participants who created what we call I Am From poems, and it's a structure that was created by Dr. LaConte-Doe, who's at, where is she at? She is at Brooklyn, SUNY downstate Brooklyn. So this is from one of our participants in one of our community-based public housing programs. I am from San Francisco. I am from Fillmore. I am from the ghetto. I am from the inner city. I am from a place of poverty. From my parents, Edward and Tina. I am from America. I am from African ancestors, from the earth, double Dutch, high jump, hopscotch. Then I also want to call on the words of Naira Waheed as we're talking about birthing. My mother was my first country, the first place I ever lived. So in sitting with what we've heard, I think that the lens that I'll bring is the way in which the clinic has been involved in this work. So I'll tell you a little bit more about some of our programming and then also talk about some of the ways in which we're struggling and we're challenging ourselves around doing this work. So we are a women's health organization that have provided services around three main areas. We provide integrated healthcare services. So we do sexual and reproductive health, mental health services, primary care. We have a robust workforce development program. So for us, we've always been invested in workforce development because we see that investing in the leadership of the next generation of healthcare leaders is the way in which we see the hopes that we have for all of our clients truly realized. And we also have robust community programs, and those shows up in two different ways. So one, we have a program that's about 15 years that's based in the Mission, where we work with women and girls who are homeless or marginally housed, living in the SROs as well. And we provide street-based outreach, so we're actually providing safer sex supplies, hygiene supplies, safer injection supplies, and referrals on the streets and in the SROs around the Mission corridor. We also have a collaboration with the Mission Neighborhood Health Center where we have an event every Thursday called Ladies Night. Most of the homeless-based services in San Francisco are not gender responsive, particularly for women and girls, and so this is one of the few spaces that is focused on homeless women and girls. And we also do health workforce development training with those clients as well. And we have another program that's based in the Western Addition where we're focusing on doing health workforce development, empowerment, healthcare access, economic justice training for folks who are living in public and subsidized housing. One of the things that we recognize as an institution is that if we're saying that we're doing this work for the community, then even requiring the community to come to us to access X, Y, Z is insufficient. And so part of what we do is we continue to push ourselves in terms of what can the way that the work that we're doing actually look differently. And I'm really proud that one of our innovators who you'll hear from, Cecilia, was someone who was brought into our orbit through our housing-based economic justice work. So I think that the other pieces that I want to talk about, Martha and Jenée beautifully set out the impact of homelessness, the impact of the housing crisis, the impact of displacement, and I wanted to add another lens of what it means to exist and move in San Francisco if you are a marginalized person who are living within a city that is telling you that you are of no value, that even if you've lived in the city for 40, 50 years, that your experiences, your family history is of no value, and to think about the impact of the stress and how that shows up, right? So if we're talking about not having a house, well, what if the person is housed? What if they have housing, you know, at Plaza East or housing in an SRO? Well, when they walk out and walk into the street, someone looks at them as if they're about to rob them. Or as they walk out and look down the street, they don't see themselves reflected. And I'll use myself as an example. I have a son, and right now when I go to different spaces, I'm often the only dark-skinned Black person in that space. And my son is oftentimes one of a handful of Black folks. That stress of navigating even that is something that we haven't even begun to start to quantify, okay? And I am incredibly resourced. I've been, you know, I have a flexible job, I have vacation and pay and all of that stuff. But the pieces that I want to push us is how does racism and white supremacy shape all of this stuff? And how are we actually talking about it? And how are we actually making sure that it is connected to every single thing that we're doing? Because if we're talking about the fact that we did not move the needle around birth outcomes, particularly for Black women and their children in this city, then what's the missing piece, right? And so when I hear that, I think about, are we talking about anti-Blackness when we talk about preterm birth? Are we talking about how that shows up in our institutions? Are we talking about the fact that actually our healthcare institutions where we're trying to get our clients to go to are actually really violent and really harmful in many ways, particularly if you're Black? Again, I'll use myself as an example. I was really blessed to be able to deliver and to have a healthy birth in the hospital. It was really stressful, right? Because all of the micro ways my voice and my needs were questioned were a constant, right? And I consider to myself, again, to be really well-resourced. And so what are we asking ourselves when we are not looking at the institutions that we're asking our clients to interact with? That we're not doing the work here, but we're only looking outward. And so some of the ways in which we've worked on that as an organization is that about 2 years ago, we really took on what does it mean to be an anti-racist organization? What does it mean to do this work in a meaningful way so that it can be, one, so that we can actually acknowledge that our institutions harm people and our institutions are places of trauma. And so that we can talk about how do we do this work differently so that we're not just repeating the same cycles and, as Jenée said, having the same meetings, creating the same interventions, right, that are just within these really small, narrow paradigms. And so it's really difficult. It's really painful. But I can't sit here in good conscience to talk about moving the needle for preterm birth outcomes, particularly in San Francisco for Black women, if we're not centering that work. The other thing that I want to say is that there is a way in which we focus on the disparities, the negativity, and I always want to remind us that if you are a young Black woman in San Francisco, the resources, the resilience, the wisdom, the expertise that you have to survive in this deeply racist, classist city is beyond. And I want us to find a way to figure out how we can actually elevate and operationalize that wisdom that already exists. I think that the work that we're doing with the innovators is a start. It is a very, very, very small start. And so I know that there are folks in the room who are funding these initiatives, who want to see them continue. I'm really excited about the intersectional ways that we're doing this work across different platforms, right? Across health, across housing, across education, across incarceration. And so how do we push ourselves that even in these spaces that we're leveraging and elevating the wisdom and the resilience and the expertise that the folks who have this lived experience really hold. And I think that the last thing that I will say I think I said actually most of what I wanted to say. Oakland, and one thing that I was very cognizant of is that we were having these conversations around othering and belonging and inclusion, and we were really missing the opportunity for intergenerational voices. And so I think that the question that I'm most struggling with is also sort of where are our young people in these conversations and in these efforts? I don't know the answer to that, but I want to make sure that that doesn't get lost.
Good evening. Oh, there we go. Good evening, everyone. Kimmy, first of all, I want to thank you so much for sitting down, because in my mind, when Martha stood up, I'm like, no, sit. Because I'm normally okay having personal conversations, but it's something about when you give me a microphone and put me in the front, I immediately get nervous. So thank you. At least I don't have to concentrate on tripping over my own feet, walking up. So, good evening, everyone. My name is Lyn-Tise Jones. I stand in representation of the Urban Services YMCA. That is my professional role, but tonight, I believe the scene has already been set. So I want to stand in representation of a person who has the lived experience of navigating my pregnancies in San Francisco, being a woman of color, living in low-income housing. And I really, really, really believe in, if we share our successes and we share our struggles and we share our stories, we can really help someone get to the next level. I know I always overcome by listening to the wisdom of others and how they made it through. And so I really want to share a personal story initially about when I was pregnant with my first son, Jeremy Jr. I gave birth at UCSF, and what I most vividly remember is that after I had given birth to a healthy boy, 20 inches, 7 pounds, 15 ounces, around 4 o'clock in the afternoon, everything was good. I was in love, I was happy, everything was amazing. And then when we were set to be released 2 days later, I couldn't stop crying, I wouldn't stop crying, and I give a shout out to the therapist who came in the room to talk with me to see if it was actually safe for me to take my baby home. I couldn't stop crying, and then when the therapist came in, she kept saying, what's wrong, and the only thing that I could say is, I don't want my baby to die, I don't want my baby to die. I just kept saying it, and I was screaming, and I just kept saying, I don't want him to die. And they started asking all these questions about, you know, are you in harm's way at home, and all of the standard questions that they have to ask you in the hospital. And I kept saying, yes, everything is fine, but experiencing so much loss and being exposed to so much trauma and so much violence in my community, and having lost so many persons. The one person who was the most specialist and had only been on earth for about 2 days, I couldn't fathom losing him. And I speak in representation of the women who live in these communities, because although they could carry very well, at least I'll speak for myself right here, you don't know what's gonna happen when you get home. And I didn't know what was gonna happen to him or to me when they released me from that hospital. The hospital was safe, I was secure there. I didn't have to worry about gunshots flying through my walls or through the windows. I didn't have to worry about someone possibly robbing me. I didn't have to worry about staying on my toes to make sure that I am able to evaluate my surrounding. And so when we left, I had to come into a place of finding myself, so that one, I didn't make his life chaotic, and I didn't want to raise my son in fear. And so that is a process that I had to work through. And even through my other 2 pregnancies, it was almost like I didn't want people to tell anyone that I was pregnant so that they wouldn't jinx it, right? Like, I didn't want people to know that I was pregnant in case my baby didn't make it. People would never know about it. And so with that being said, I think about the women that we're serving. So now in my professional role, thinking about the women that we're serving, hearing their stories. Some of them don't have enough food, some of them don't have proper heat, some of them don't have the things that they need to take care of their own basic needs, let alone a child. So we are building 4 health and wellness centers in the 4 Hope SF sites. Sunnydale has already been constructed, and the other 3 are underway, Trail Hill, Alice Griffith, and Huntersview. And in those programs, we will have therapists, we'll have nurses, we'll have social activities, we will have community events to help decrease the isolation and the fear that the women and all the residents go through in these communities about being afraid to come out of their own homes. And we want to make it as welcoming and loving as possible. We hire 4 residents in each community so that the residents will serve as the feedback loop to say if we are giving appropriate services and to inform our practices on what they actually need instead of telling them what they need in their own communities, right? And so many times, well-meaning folk can silence the voice of the persons in need of the services. So I think that it's very appropriate, and it's beyond me how people can approach this work without humility and without asking what services are needed rather than going off a certain spreadsheet. We are very, very, very committed to elevating the voices of our peer health leaders. So I know that Urban Services YMCA, we are committed to doing everything that we can to continue this work, to support this initiative, to make sure that women can feel safe and that their pregnancies are healthy and that we can do all that we can to do this work. We know that it's hard, we know that it's challenging, but it's so rewardingly beautiful. So we meet it with compassion, we meet it with humility, we meet it with grace and love, and we wrap our arms around everyone who will come into that wellness center. Thank you.
So, I mean, it's really hard to follow this, but what we have next is great. So, you all have spoken so eloquently about the need for action, and that is what we are all aimed at. In order for us collectively, for this project, for the city to move forward on changing policy, thinking of new programs, engaging in innovative research, we need the evidence, and there's a lot of it already. There are folks in this room who this is your life's work, and this project over the next 3 months are going to be gathering what you all have already done and then adding to it with our intention around research justice and trying to center the experience that so many of you talked about of women who have the lived experience of preterm birth or pregnancy and the challenges around inadequate housing. But also we want to hear more from the folks who work directly with women in this city. So I want to turn it over to Bree.
Okay, sorry. Good evening, everyone, once again, and I personally want to thank you all for sharing your time with us. It means a lot to me. My name is Bree, and I'm here to introduce our group of innovators. We are 10 strong women of color who are also very caring mothers. Collectively, we have 25 children, 12 grandchildren, and as was mentioned earlier, 1 baby that was born today. That mom was so upset that she couldn't make it today. 2 hours after giving birth, she texted the facilitator saying, "I'm so sorry I won't be able to make it today." Why are you texting me? You just had birth. We're all that dedicated to this.
She invited us upstairs.
Yeah. I can't wait. We range in age from 26 to 55. We come from various communities across the city, including the Tenderloin, Mission District, Potrero Hill, Hunters Point, Sunnydale, and Western Addition. We all have a legacy totaling 322 years of experience living in San Francisco. Our educational backgrounds are diverse in certification and degrees ranging from painting to CPR and medical assistance. We are doulas, translators, community health workers, lactation consultants, and leaders in many ways. Our individual hobbies include swimming, crafting, and event planning, but we all believe in self-care and quality time with our children. I will now pass it on to Randy so she can do the
Good evening, and thank you all for being here. My name is Randy. I work with Homeless Prenatal Program, and I am one of 10 innovators. Individually, we were identified by the partnering CBOs, which we all have varying relationships with and work with throughout the week. We also spend a few hours a week reflecting on this project, and many of us are also involved in other works of the CBOs. As a group, we've met weekly since the end of January. From the beginning, we were grounded on a few different themes: praxis, socio-ecological perspectives, and justice. These themes have been threaded throughout our work thus far. Our aim is to constantly be planning, acting, and reflecting praxis from a socio-ecological lens and to make an impact on justice for women and communities of color. Our first few weeks were spent building relationships with one another, our partners, UCSF and San Francisco State University. We met with our partners to better understand the problem at hand and work we need to do. We also continue to bring our own stories to the group as they are crucial to this work. Over the past several weeks, we have talked about research as a tool for justice. We understand that there are multiple types of knowledge and information, but to address the high preterm birth rates we see for women of color here in San Francisco, we know we need to highlight the voices and experiences of these women. This is not only important to our project, but also in setting a standard of research that relies on voices of communities and make those voices heard and visible to all to make change. We began our process by developing a collective analysis of what factors across the socio-ecological model really impact women and lead to preterm birth. Cecilia is going to share this analysis with you.
Thank you, Randy, for that beautiful introduction. My name is Cecilia. I am one of the innovators. I'm a WHAT intern with the Women's Community Clinic. I first with Ann also wanted to say the 12 grandchildren that they mentioned earlier, all mine. I first want to give you a brief definition of a social ecological model. A social ecology is a framework of set of theoretical principles for understanding the dynamic interrelationships among various personal and environmental factors. A socio-ecological perspective includes a deep look at the factors that impact women in preterm birth outcomes, but recognizes the individual in a larger context of her community, environment, and society. First, on an individual level, some of the greatest risk factors include stress, and more stress, addiction, poor nutrition, lack of awareness and knowledge, low self-esteem, consuming unhealthy foods, lack of exercise, smoking cigarettes or marijuana, lack of prenatal care. For example, one of the innovators became more aware and knowledgeable of the importance of having a doula help to assist her through her birthing process. She had 3 and she just gave birth, but the importance of having a doula. We didn't know anything about it. She didn't know anything about the importance of having a doula. For example, we know that women are constantly in relationship with others, and factors in those relationships also impact a woman's health and birth outcomes. Some of these relational factors include unhealthy relationships, lack of support from family, little or no support from the child's father, domestic violence, and domestic violence. Now let's look at the socio-ecological model from a community level that explores the settings such as schools, workplace, and neighborhoods in which relationships occur and allow us to identify the characteristics of these settings that are associated with preterm birth. Violence again, lack of access to healthy foods, lack of access to health facilities, unhealthy living conditions, lack of health of resources in the community, lack of affordable housing, high unemployment rates, high number of liquor stores in low-income communities, inaccessible health care, challenging relationships with law enforcement, also community factors that impact preterm birth. and filing. We can look at the society and political level of this model. Immigration policies, medical insurance policies, being told that your insurance will only cover a certain, procedure, cause a lot of stress. Educational and institutional inequalities, barriers to stable housing, lack of awareness from political leaders, poor hospital, poor doctor care. Some just don't care, and that's a hard thing. That's something that they gotta deal with, they gotta change, from within. It's a hard thing. Systematic racism, just because of the color of our skin. How many women like to go shopping? And does it relieve stress? Sometimes it does. For a lot of women, it relieves stress. Well, as a woman of color, going into any department store, I'm followed around like I'm a thief and treated as such. Anytime that I go into a grocery store, or whether it's a grocery store or Ross or shopping, period, it causes additional stress on a person. Or go to a doctor's appointment, and the doctor will take 5 minutes with you and tell you you're okay, but you're really in pain, and won't give you anything for pain, thinking that, we can, as African American women, can handle a lot of pain. Well, that's not the case, So this analysis informs the approach we take to our research and to understanding what else we need to learn from women. We've started this process, and soon we will start the process of data collection to hear the voices of the women. Sarah is going to share with us about our plan. Share with you about our plan.
Hi everyone, I'm Sabra Bell, representing Black Infant Health. Essential to this partnership and assessment is the process of raising our voices of women. We want to make sure that the experiences of women of color are used to guide any future planning, funding, and change. To make sure this happens, we are going to talk to pregnant and parenting women of color from San Francisco about their experiences with preterm birth. We are going to work with 4 partnering CPOs to identify women and conduct surveys to collect data and better understand what is happening. These surveys will also serve as a recruitment tool to identify women who can participate in focus groups and interviews when necessary, to raise the voices and experiences of women. This will be done in partnership with the CBOs, and we will also be doing direct outreach with women in our communities across San Francisco with various living conditions that have large populations of women of color. We'll be starting data collection soon and look forward to sharing what we learned at the end of July. We are really excited to be doing this work with the San Francisco State students. I'm now going to pass it to them to share about who they are.
Hi everyone, thank you for being here. My name is Rebecca, and I have the honor and privilege to introduce our Masters in Public Health student cohort. Although you can find information about each of us in the handout you were given, we thought you would also be interested to know more who we are collectively. And collectively, we have 102 years of experience working in social justice and health. Among the 13 of us, 11 speak languages other than English, including Tigrinya, Hindi, Mutoro, American Sign Language, Turkmen, Spanish, Russian, and Cantonese. Half of us have worked in maternal, child, and reproductive health, and 5 have worked in housing-related issues. Moreover, 9 of us have had previous research experience, and 6 have worked abroad. In addition to being graduate students, we are also policy analysts, researchers, project managers, case managers, educators and health educators, as well as advocates and activists for reproductive justice, disability, and health equity, who are all firmly committed to social justice work. And now I will hand it over to Jenée.
Good evening, I'm Jenée, and as Rebecca has so nicely introduced us, I will now be providing you all with some background about the work that we've been doing and our involvement in this assessment. We are first-year graduate students at SF State pursuing a master's in public health with an emphasis in community health education. Our involvement in this project and our partnership with the innovators is a part of our Community Assessment for Change and Public Health Practicum course that spans over 2 semesters from January until July. We are prepared for this assessment by not only bringing our professional experiences into the classroom, but we have also taken a qualitative research methods class, a community organizing class, and a theories class. In these classes, we critically look at health issues across the different levels of the socio-ecological model with a social justice and cultural humility lens. We meet twice a week to learn about the process of conducting assessments, to engage in dialogue, and continuously reflect and evaluate our own processes as we ground ourselves through this exciting time. For us, this experience is not only the opportunity to be a part of this larger initiative, but it is also an opportunity to learn and gain critical skills that will help us grow as future public health professionals. We are applying the theories that we have learned in the classroom and putting it into practice, as we are especially focusing on the praxis of listening, reflecting, and taking action. As Rebecca mentioned, we are all committed to social justice, and through this community-based participatory research partnership with the innovators, we are hoping to make a meaningful impact on the community's health to address the issue of preterm birth and its relationship to housing in San Francisco. And now I'll turn it over to Heather.
We conducted a literature review to better understand the connections between inadequate housing and preterm birth. We examined literature about how lack of quality housing influences preterm birth and other adverse birth outcomes, and also research about interventions. We looked at research that had been published within the last 10 years in the United States, and I'm going to take a few minutes to share with you some of our key findings. A lot of these findings have already been discussed by everyone up here, and a lot of the literature just seeks to reinforce what a lot of people in this room are already aware of. Multiple studies found housing instability and homelessness to be predictors of adverse birth outcomes. The following key factors were found to link housing inadequacy and preterm birth. Not surprisingly, and in line with one of Cecilia's main points, our review of the literature revealed maternal stress as a key factor in adverse birth outcomes, including preterm birth. There are numerous causes of stress for all pregnant women, but for women who are inadequately housed, stress is magnified and can be both acute and chronic. For these women, the risk of preterm birth is especially high, as a key source of stability, housing, is either uncertain or can be dangerous, and access to food, prenatal care, and other essential resources is also challenged. The stressful circumstances of homelessness can exacerbate smoking, substance use, chronic health and mental health conditions, and poor nutrition, all of which are strong indicators of preterm birth and other adverse birth outcomes. Furthermore, as Knight writes in her ethnography of pregnant women living at SROs in San Francisco, residential transience, the disruption of moving between housing situations, has been associated with poor health outcomes for women, in particular, depression. The effects of displacement can also be seen in women moved to demolition of public housing or gentrification, which we are experiencing a lot of in this city, who may experience higher rates of adverse birth outcomes as well. For African American women who live in unstable or unhealthy housing conditions, stress is furthered by experiences of structural and interpersonal violence, again, which has been discussed in personal stories today. Kramer and Hogue found that regardless of where African American women live, they experience excess risk of preterm birth due to discrimination and racism. racial residential segregation presents particular preterm birth risks for African American women. Researchers explore the concept of weathering, the physical embodiment and reproductive damage developed over a result of lifelong poverty, racism, and neighborhood segregation. The impact of this constellation of factors is stark, as white women who live in low-income neighborhoods over time are not observed to have similar detrimental prenatal effects. It is important to note that some studies do show that racial segregation can act as a protective factor for some women, for African American and Latinx women, when housing clustering also fosters supportive social networks. We also learned, as has been discussed as well, that the degraded physical environment of a woman's neighborhood and housing is linked to adverse birth outcomes. Although many low-income women may live in stable housing with their name on a lease to public housing or an affordable unit, environmental hazards can also further degrade their living conditions. For pregnant women, this ongoing exposure to chemicals, waste, mold, crowding, and pollution compromises their own health and puts them at increased risk for adverse birth outcomes. As I mentioned, in addition to looking at the connections between housing inadequacy and preterm birth, we looked at interventions that address housing instability among pregnant women, as well as programs that use housing or an opportunity to reach these women. Literature shows that programs that facilitate accessibility, recognize the impact of life experience on birth outcomes, and are rooted in strong interpersonal relationships are particularly effective. Home-based, housing site located, and mobile services all have demonstrated success serving low-income pregnant women. Nurse-family partnerships stands out as a model with impressive outcomes, and numerous home visiting programs across the country show the value of providing in-home support to low-income pregnant women and the positive aspects of early initiation of prenatal care. In Miami, an evaluation of the Mom Mobile, a program that delivers mobile prenatal care to low-income women, showed that women who accessed this service had and started prenatal care earlier on in their pregnancy and had prenatal birth rates of half that of a control group. For women who are inadequately housed, engaging with programs that incorporate access to stable housing and supportive services is key. In Boston, the Housing Authority has partnered with the Department of Public Health for the Healthy Start in Housing program, which prioritizes and expedites housing for pregnant women. Once pregnant women move into the housing program, they receive free intensive case management services from a staff member at the health department for a year to maintain their stability. An evaluator of the program explains that life course theory and the ability to impact multiple generations was a key argument that led the Housing Authority to get behind this prioritization of housing for pregnant women. Another key approach to ensuring accessible and meaningful services for inadequately housed women is community health workers. In multiple studies, participants expressed that community health workers were able to relate to themselves and their families and able to break down barriers of trust and communication that folks outside the community were unable to do. Particularly for unstably housed women, the support of CHWs led to improved outcomes and increased connections to other community resources. Our examinations of interventions focused on housing and preterm birth was inspiring. However, it also showed us the challenges in serving this population of inadequately housed pregnant women. For example, even when women are prioritized for housing, such as in Boston, the bureaucratic systems tend to ignore pregnancy as a time-sensitive, urgent medical need. Housing may be made available too late to make a difference in birth outcomes, for example, when that unit is available only after the woman has delivered, as has happened in some cases in Boston. In addition, unstably housed, addicted pregnant women For many of them, supportive housing is not usually an option. And even if a pregnant woman does have stable housing, frequently in-home support like community health workers are not covered under their private or public insurance plans. Finally, and of the utmost importance, a review of the literature found very few examples that shared the experiences and uplifted the voices of unstably housed pregnant women themselves. We found very few examples of community-based participatory research to examine the best way to serve and support pregnant women with inadequate housing. In light of this, I'm going to turn it over to Preterm, who's going to share with you our role in this community academic partnership.
Hi, I'm Preterm, and I'm going to discuss the future direction of our research. As Heather mentioned, our key findings were fundamental conditions for success for interventions for preterm birth and housing. This includes incorporating lived experiences, rooting interventions in strong relationships, and partnerships between public health and housing agencies. Our work will focus on the current landscape of service and system folks, while the community innovators will interview those with lived experiences. Over the next month and a half, we aim to conduct 50 in-depth qualitative interviews with program staff and system informants about the relationship between preterm birth and housing. We hope to interview many of you in the room today. 7 of us will interview program staff who directly support and serve pregnant women with inadequate housing. We'll contact CBOs such as Homeless Prenatal, Black Infant Health, Compass, and Hive, to name a few. 6 of us will be interviewing 6 of us will interview systems. 6 of us will interview those that influence the systems that address the needs of pregnant women and housing in the city of San Francisco, such as San Francisco Department of Public Health, Housing Authority, First 5, San Francisco Health Plan, and political figures. Next, we'll be transcribing and analyzing the data and produce a report. The data analysis will be done collaboratively with the community innovators. We'll work together to create recommendations for policy, research, and programs. During the last week of July 2017, we will formally be presenting our findings. We hope that you will join us. Together with the innovators, we hope to inform action to improve birth outcomes in the city of San Francisco.
Here. Good afternoon. Good evening.
Hey, Brett.
I'm going to go without a mic. Can you hear me? Okay. No. All right. Where's the mic? I have a cold. So I do need the mic. I have a cold. So I'd like to start by having us take 3 breaths together. Not unlike the way Jenée did, but a little bit different. So just start by putting both your feet flat on the ground. Clean our palate in a way. We've been here for a long time, so we've got to be strong. All right? I'm standing over here to the side, so be part of the circle. So let's take 3 breaths together. Okay, breathe in and out. In and out. In and out. Thank you. So, global spiritual leader and kind of activist Thich Nhat Hanh calls what we just did a meditation. Is that meditation isn't actually that I close my eyes and I walk on water and everything feels good. It's actually the practice of reflecting on an act. So in that case, we were reflecting on the act of our breathing, or we might reflect on the act of our walking. Okay? Now, why that's important is because Paulo Freire, much of our work is embedded in this idea of praxis that comes from Paulo Freire. And he talks about practice as a balance of reflection and action. So if you have action without reflection, it can be violent. Or if you only have reflection without action, it can be inert, like so much of academia. So that's part of why we're here to practice, because that's the other piece about it, is it's not something that, unless we have a contemplative practice, we may not even be aware that this is something that actually takes a fitness to cultivate. So part of what we want to do now is give ourselves an opportunity to practice and close in dialogue. What we're doing here is these understanding goals are kind of come from a framework from Project Zero in Harvard. It talks about things that in a pedagogical setting things we're going to learn. So as the director of social practices and pedagogy, I'm going to show you number one, that's what we just talked about, what praxis is. And number two, how can looking deeply through creativity and dialogue with others help to refine our understanding about housing and preterm birth in San Francisco? So now that's what we're about to do. So in a moment, and I'm going to have my team start to kind of pass these out. What I want you to do is, right to the person that's next to, everyone should have a blue piece of paper. And if you don't have one in the back, you're just going to stay next to it. But I want to keep everyone's awareness. I know it's very exciting. You can have a couple colors. And every group should have a pen. So take a pen for your group. Here's a pen. Take a pen for your group. When you come over here, take a pen, take one to pass, take one to pass. Take one and pass. We pass this back around. Take one for your group. So everyone should have a pen. Pass the colors. We're not much time. Gotta keep it rolling. Okay. Just grab two colors.
Oh, more.
Everyone, need a marker? There's some markers going around still. Get a marker. There's still some coming around. You can use colors too. If you don't have a marker, you're okay. Just make sure you have a couple colors. If you have a couple colors, you're straight. So let me invite everybody back. I know some people are still using colors.
You with me? I don't know, I've been acting up.
So, what we're going to do, what we're doing is our guiding principles. So part of our aspiration is to not have this just be a theoretical, without action experience. That so often was a funny joke, but it's true in academia. That we wanted to have this be an embodied experience. And so we're going to do something creative. And typically in arts integrated creativity, there's a transformation. So typically, when I was coming up as an educator, I thought arts integration meant like I read a story and then I drew something and that was arts integration. And it kind of is. I think these photo voice things that we have from the Department of Public Health that are around the room are much better examples of an opportunity for people to do something creative that in that process, their understanding is transformed. So I'll be really frank and not overpromise and not expect you to have a deep transformation from this episode. And I do think that I can create this opportunity with the help of my colleagues to give us a chance to dialogue deeply with people in the room, rather than the conventional 5 people get on the mic and they tell us what they're thinking about if we have a question. So what we're going to do is something called drawing memories. And it's kind of a modification of a strategy I typically use. Typically, it's something I do for 15 minutes at a time. We're going to do it at 5. It's going to go really quickly. So what I'm going to invite you to do is in a moment with your pair, one of the person is going to spend 5 minutes writing and drawing about what they found inspirational or have added to your understanding or have raised questions for you in this collaboratory today. And the other person is just going to listen. And part of why we're doing this is the practice of what it really means to reflect. Because I think so oftentimes, we don't listen very well. And I think a lot of times I find myself in conversation with people, and while they're talking, I'm already thinking of the question I'm going to ask them while they're talking. And so part of this is a practice of reflecting on what we've heard and transforming that into something visual. And the other part of it is a practice on just really being present and listening. And then when that 5 minutes is up, we're going to switch, and then the other person is going to do it. And I'll just give you a little sample since we've been really going deep on the ecological model, so mine is kind of like, I drew my own little ecological model, and then I put in what I was hearing of representations of those models in the room today. But this does not have to be like yours. And in the spirit of acceptance, there is no wrong or right answers. Okay? These are not things I'm going to sell so my kids can go to college. That is not the point of this. The point of this is to practice listening and to practice this idea of making our learning visible, of really taking this as an opportunity to make what we've learned tonight visible. So is everybody ready? I'm going to be the timekeeper. So you're going to get 5 minutes. The idea of listening is you're watching that person write or draw that thing out. Oh. So that person, while you're telling, in the modification that I'm telling you, typically the way I use it is I'll have people talk about where they're from. And they'll draw where they grew up. And so part of it's really, to be transparent, part of it's really powerful as a practice because not only do I not always listen deeply to people, very seldom do we have people listen to us for 5 minutes. So for a lot of people, that part of this practice is really profound, that they have someone that present with them for 5 minutes. But the other part is for you to just watch and embody this idea of how can I make about learn this. Okay, does that clarify things for everyone? So I'm going to give a hard stop when 5 minutes is up. I have my timer. 1, 2, 3, go. So before we switch, ask yourself, was it difficult for you to be silent? Were you silent? I guess I would say that because, again, praxis is reflection and action. And I think, when I think about not doing harm, for example, like, I so often used to think that not doing harm meant, yeah, big institutions have resources or make promises and then they don't deliver. And that's like doing harm. But what I've come to realize is that a lot of times there are things structurally like I might be a researcher and I'm only 10% on this soft money, and so I can only give so much time to this one mission. And without really looking deeply and listening to those conditions, I'm not being truthful with myself about that's a structural condition that makes it difficult to care for these people. That's not really listening to what's deeply at the conditions of part of why this is the way it is. So it's a practice. Listening is a very deep practice. So I want to invite you to consider that when we switch. And for the person who's listening, try really hard to listen. And for the person who's sharing, use this as a chance to really be listened to. Okay? So let me reset and go.
So, I mean, yeah, because, there are What I found most inspirational about today was, I think, Lyn-Tise's story about being a young mom exposed to trauma.
These guys are all black, which bugs me. It's like, why can't there be some black researchers? Why? And then
from a single woman who is worked in the house or not in the house because that comment at the end of the day, means that.
It's like, what are we gonna do? What are we gonna do? What is our priority? Just like you said, what's the actual thing to do? Like, we're not, what is, like, who are we trying to get to listen to us? And that, so it's like, it's constant, like,
Everyone's attention. Thank you so much for enthusiastically participating in this. I hope it gave you a chance to have some meaningful reflection with someone in the room. Again, part of our aspiration to do this was so that we really embody what we're doing in this initiative. So in terms of our guiding principles, once again, do no harm, incorporate creative and reflective processes, practice acceptance, and invest in community self-determination. We've kind of been doing that. And the last thing, the collaborating for equity and justice principles are really inspirational. They come from this article that Jessica mentioned. And one of the last ones talking about how in these processes we actually scaffold participants in becoming facilitators themselves. And again, in my mind, part of that comes from practice. So for the last thing that we're going to do in this exercise, we're going to embody some of the same kind of protocols that we've been doing on Monday nights with the innovators and with the graduate students. And so right now, I want to invite everyone to come and put your blue papers on the floor. And just stand in the circle. We can push the chairs back. Come on up. This is the acceptance part. Colors are up here. And stay up here where you can see them. It makes more space. Come on up here and stay up here. What's them up here? Take a look around. Come on up. Which way you can see it. Might need to push the chairs back a little. That's okay. Give yourself lots of space and check them out. Don't leave. As you drop your picture off, kind of look around at others. Put it on the floor anywhere. The whole floor. You can see. So now what we're going to do is I'm going to invite you to do this protocol that we call See, Think, and Wonder. So the first thing, this is something that we've been doing on Monday nights. What I want you to do first is, we first start out by saying, what do we see? So quite literally, without interpretation.
different saying.
What else do you see? You see a cloud. Exactly.
Different vantage points of the situation, of what's the problem I have.
Fantastic.
Lots of hearts.
Lots of hearts.
I see lots of question marks.
Lots of question marks. Okay, what's something you think? So now it can be, what do you think? So there is a little bit of a filter of inference. What's something you think?
I think these are a bunch of stepping stones.
These are a bunch of stepping stones. What else do you think?
Concerns.
Concerns. You think these are concerns?
Helping people.
You think it's helping people? Yeah, I mean, I will say to that, as I said, Thich Nhat Hanh talks about reflection and action as meditation, and Paulo Freire talks about dialogue as reflection and action. As an art maker, I think of art making as reflecting and action. So when you're working, invariably there were moments in that practice of making things that you're reflecting on the act of what you're making. And so part of what we're rooted in and what we think this work is rooted in is it can't be separate from being therapeutic. It can't just be like, we're going to study things around health and have it be unhealthy in the process. Part of it is like, how do we embed healthy practices in the actual process? And in my mind, part of this is, as the young gentleman so clearly and articulately pointed out, an effort to make that. What's one more thing that we think?
It's our reality.
It's your reality, it comes from your voices. Any other things?
All the ideas that we need are already in the room,
All the ideas we need are already in the room.
but everybody touches each other.
Everyone touches each other. Okay, what do you wonder?
Is this really gonna solve anything? Is it really gonna help us?
Straight up. Good question. What else? What happens next? What else do you wonder? I wonder how many times something like this has been done in this space.
How do you control your tax dollars?
How do you control your tax dollars?
How strong of a community are we?
Very strong.
Well, I would just like to say thank you. I'm going to hand it to Jessica to really bring it all home and kind of round it out. But I want to thank you for this courage that it takes to really be reflective and to practice, being in praxis, and the enthusiasm that you showed towards this exercise. Jessica?
Yeah. It's actually going to be Jenée who really closes us out. But I want to call your attention to some half a sheet of paper that's in your folder that it has 2 questions on it. Would you be willing to be interviewed? And do you have any data or know of any data or evidence that you'd like to have included in this project to be part of the evidence base for an action agenda? If you do, please just jot that down and hand it to somebody from the Health Equity Institute. We'll be milling around with everybody else. If you have questions that came up, I encourage you, as we break, to go ask the person who has the answer to that question and to continue the dialogue. There's also an evaluation for the collaboratory as you leave. Please fill that out if you can. And I want to thank you all for participating with us tonight. It's a total honor to be here with all of you. And on that, I want to hand it over to Jenée, who's going to really take it home.
We're going to take it home. Old-fashioned way. Just came to me, it just dawned on me. Because what this takes underneath our feet, we have to take risks. We have to have courage. And we have to be innovative. And we also, I love that you all are standing up on stuff, because we stand on the shoulders of people that came before us. And what I know that we're doing in our work is we're using our whole selves. We're using our bodies, we're using our voices, we're using our minds. It's not just from the neck up. So you know what I'm gonna do? We're gonna sing. Oh yeah, get ready. And you know, and here's the great thing, is you're not singing by yourself, so it don't matter. You just sing like that. Because when we all put our voices together, it all sounds beautiful, right? Right. So this little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Second verse. Everywhere I go, I'm gonna let it shine. Everywhere I go, I'm gonna let it shine. Everywhere I go, I'm gonna let it shine, let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. And that is what I would have you move out in the world with. So whether you're online at Safeway, on Muni, or in your Mercedes-Benz, whatever, shine on, be present, wake up, wake somebody else up, be kind, be about your business. Move from consumer to citizen and engage, okay? All right. This little light of mine. Clap your hands, let's go. I'm gonna let it shine.